So we've eased back over to David, the subject of David. We're actually going to be in 2 Samuel chapter 6. And what we did is we've skipped over what I would call the soap opera David versus Saul back and forth competition, and Saul's going to get him, he gets away, Saul's going to get him, and why he doesn't kill Saul. So all that is we've made a pretty big jump is all I'm really trying to tell you, and we're focusing on different elements within David's life and now kingship. So that's what we've moved to, is a state where he is now the king, and we'll pick that up in a second. So now David is the king of all of Israel, not just one of the kingdoms that had been split. So it says at the beginning of chapter 6, and the bulletin says we're going to 25. I actually decided we'll probably be stopping about 10, and that's what I think the screen is going to reflect. So David again brought together the able young men of Israel, 30,000. And he and all of his men went to Baal in Judah, names get me, all right, in Judah, to bring from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Almighty, or God Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on a hill. Uzziah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it. And Ahio was walking in front, and David and all of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. Then they came to the threshing floor of Nacon. Old Uz, or young Uz, reached out and took hold of the ark because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uz, and because of his irreverent act, therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because of the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uz, and to this day the place is called Perez Uzziah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. So, as I said, we jumped over some big chunks. I know we had another special service in the middle, and so we were on David before, and now we've come back to it. And our reading sort of starts at the point, we've skipped so much, that King is David of the whole kingdom. And so it's a time after Samuel and his sons are dead. Samuel is dead, and Saul and his sons are dead, and so it's a time when they've even defeated, since the death of Saul, they've even defeated the Philistines. So it's a time of peace. It's a time when things are quieter, and so it's about 7 years, if you read some of the experts, it's about 7 years into this kingdom, and suddenly we have this story where David sort of decides, I'm going to bring some people together, and we're going to go recover the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of God. And so maybe I better remind you, it's not exactly like the Indiana Jones stuff shows, okay, about the Ark of the Covenant. There's a requirement of some holiness. It comes from the time of Moses, and it was put into the tabernacle of meeting, and it was a separation when God was actually hovered upon the tent. Nobody was allowed to go inside, but when it went away, it was a place of worship and singing and a place to celebrate God. And it was a wooden box covered in gold. It was about 2.5 feet square by 4 feet 4 inches. Now, that's people's measurements that I borrowed there. It's totally covered in gold, and there are these rings on the corners that allow people to put, or they're always supposed to be in it according to reading the law, but there are these gold-laden, laced rods that go in that allow the ark to be lifted and carried. And so whenever the ark is packed up up, or whenever everything is taken down, they pack it up and they cover it with a very heavy goat skin cover. So basically, the only people that might ever get a chance to see it would be a few priests, very few probably even in that day, and perhaps Moses, and everybody else just saw the sticks, or the heavy rods, and the people that would carry it, because the rest of the time it was in the Holy of Holies within the tabernacle. So while it was described as this very beautiful container that actually has cherubim on top, and I'm not sure I totally get where they say that God is actually seated on the mercy seat as much as this is a footstool for God, because I believe God was still actually enthroned in heaven, and we're using terms that would try to define the God being in one place or another, when we have an understanding now that God is everywhere. So here we have this community that packs up for 40 years and moves through the desert, and God leads those people. When they come to the promised land, God leads the people in battle after battle by going with them with the ark. And so they are blessed with their battles, they're blessed with the things, their people continue to grow and multiply. And when they finished the conquest of the promised land, the ark gets parked. It goes to a community of Shiloh. That's where the tabernacle is set up, and we read about it next when Eli is the priest. It's about 400 years later, and his two sons are really the acting priests, and Eli is the retired or retiring priest. And so they're not described as being really good guys. But the ark is there, and Israel has gone back to being a little distant from God, and that's one of the reasons I guess the ark and the tent of meeting have become less used, or maybe not used at all. And so they've drifted from God, and then the Philistines come back to special power, and they start picking on and choosing battles, and they lose a pretty big battle. They get up enough people to try to fight them off, and they end up losing about 3,000 people. So it describes it as in there that the people say, well, hey, let's go get the ark. We got all those stories from 400 years ago. We'll just go get the ark, and we'll carry it into battle, and that way we can win. Okay, I'm going to define that kind of understanding of the Ark of the Covenant is like saying, well, I've got my best rabbit foot in my pocket, and I'm going to go fight my Philistine bully. It's looking for a charm to get God to act. You see, when they took the ark from Shiloh, there's no reference that there was any prayer. God did not instruct them. It was something the people came up with, and then the two sons of Eli, they go along with it, and they all go off to battle. And when they go to battle with the ark, it doesn't work like they expected. The good lucky charm of battle from 400 years before didn't work for them, because they lost about 30,000 men in that battle. And they also lost the ark to the Philistines. And they took it home as a trophy of war. They have defeated these people. They had also heard about the ark, and they thought they were really going to have a hard time, but when they really rallied their troops and they won, then they were so pleased that they had won. They had defeated the Israelites and their God, and there's a whole story we're not going to go into where they take it back, and things don't go so well when the Ark of the Covenant was in the hands of the people that were technically holding God hostage. Because if this box is representation of where God is present, then when they took the ark into Gath or the different places that it ended up going, they were taking God, the Israelite God, around, and God didn't offer blessing. There were curses that they received. So eventually they send it back on a cart with no driver. So if you want to read those stories, you can find those pretty easy. Because it's pretty interesting how they choose to know if it was God's will that he wanted to go home or not. And so you can read about that in the ox cart. They did make a new ox cart in that case too, as our story did today. So for about 7 months, the Philistines had the Ark of the Covenant in their possession, and then they let it wander away on an ox cart to where, when it enters into the land of Israel, they are done with it. They even put some of their own offerings of gold onto the cart, and that's also just a little side stuff. So Eli's sons died in the battle. Eli dies when he learns of the loss. It's not a good time for Israel when they lost the ark. But when it comes back, the people celebrate. They actually sacrificed the cows and everything they thought was going great, but then somebody decided to open the ark. Lots of people that looked at the ark died. These are Israelite people. These are not the priesthood. I'm not sure. I think hopefully they would have been trained not to do that. But so it was a bad time, and so they end up taking the ark to the home of the family we read about this, Obed-Ed's family, and they were entrusted with it for about 20 years. 20 years it sat on their oxen port or in their barn in a stall somewhere on their household. The ark was kept by the family, and I don't know that there's a lot of care and feeding you need to do with an ark. I doubt it, but they at least kept it in a place of honor. Maybe they dusted it too. I don't know all the things they might have done, but we know that for that period of time, so 400 years it had been one place in Shiloh, and then it moved to Philistine land, and then it came back. And so after a certain amount of time, another 20 years goes by. The lucky rabbit foot process of trying to use the ark didn't return. Neither Saul nor David used it in that way. But David does make a decision after he was reigning for 7 years that he was going to bring the ark back, not to Shiloh. He's going to bring it to Jerusalem. And so I had to do some reading. Okay, why would he make this decision to bring it back? And maybe why? I was also wondering why other people hadn't tried before this. But these scholars with some very educated, very knowledgeable opinions gave a couple of things, and there were some that were pretty far out there for me. But a couple of things I said, well, okay, the big picture is pretty good on that. I think I can follow it. See, Israel has been a divided kingdom before David became the king of the whole area. So this would be sort of a unifying thing because they were agreed that they were under one God. So his intention was to bring it to Jerusalem, and there it would be the center of government. It would also be the center of religious activity for the kingdom. And David was into tying those two together. He was not a separation of church and state guy at all. He was, I'm under God's control. He was a lot different than our politicians might be today. So David wanted to make Jerusalem the place that would unify the whole country so that, well, if you put it where the king is, then maybe there's not quite as much argument about whose turf it was in. When you read the story, you figure out that David made a lot of preparations before this day. This wasn't just a Wednesday get up and I'm going to go get the ark. This was send out invitations, gather people, have cart made, have musical instrument made. The list goes on and on of the things. You've got to feed all those people. And then it's only got to move about 6 miles. So from where it is now to Jerusalem is said to be about 6 miles. Now that's not over the good roads, not like we would expect. It was rocky and hilly and it was bumpy and so it was going to be, well, any kind of the trek back then would be pretty hard. So he decided he wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant to the capital for the whole nation of Israel. He's going to do it because that's where he put the government, because that's where Saul has centralized his government. So it sounds not too far-fetched that those things could be real, that David would have been making decisions that would be unifying and not separating. And he doesn't cut corners on the things he's going to do because he commissions a new cart. Now, I would imagine it was made of the best wood, the strongest. It was probably the best livestock or the oxen or cows or whatever we're going to haul this thing. We're going to be chosen very specifically. It might have even had a little spiritual bling and some of the things that might have the way it was painted. But it was going to be, well, that's just a part of it. It was going to be something that would allow them to bring back the ark and do it with strong animals. It wouldn't surprise me if we learned that he actually had all the instruments made new, because it gives you a description of all these instruments, and then he has musicians that have come to play and to celebrate. He has, he's prepared a special tent that will be talked about next week in Jerusalem that probably very closely mirrors what he knew about the tabernacle. So we know that he's prepared even to where it will go and stay. It's not just going to be stuck in the foyer in the front of the house or in the royal barns. It's going to go to a place of honor that is intended to be the right place for this object to be kept and worshipped with and used as a representation of God. And we don't know the full layout of that tent, Can you imagine that day they go out the 6 miles? How do 30 people walk from Jerusalem out to somebody's house? I thought about that. I actually went and reminded myself, because when the figures came back, I remembered, you give shoulder to shoulder, you give every person 2 feet. If you take 30,000 young men, that's almost 6 miles, standing 2 beside each other the whole distance. How do you get out to somebody's house? So I wondered, are the 30,000 men, are they actually there more as security, lining the side of the road so the rest of the people, because other people are going to come out to see this procession. It's not that far to go 6 miles in that day, just to go and run down the road. So I think they're lining up along the road all the way, and then as the cart goes by, as this procession gets going, this parade gets started, people are going to be following to where all those people that are from Jerusalem are going to work their way back in, but there's still all these people that are extra. There's enough people to really clog the road. I did go out and look up photos of where the house was, and because it says it's on a hill, and I thought, well, that's sort of unusual. I think Israel's pretty hilly. Well, when I found the place, there's actually a church on top of that hill now, and there's a lot of places in Israel that are like that. It's a big hill right in the middle of nowhere, and it sticks up out of the ground. And so it's when they're describing it, it was a good way to find it, I guess, back through history. But it's sort of like Myrtle Hill, how sharp it is, except I think it's like 2,000 feet tall. So when it says a hill, we would say a mountain here, because we call the hills we have around here mountains. So it's much larger than Myrtle Hill, but it has an entryway that in the time, and so I guess it's just an interesting thing we know about it, or maybe it's just talking about being on a hill. Maybe it's harder to get the cart off of a hill. But here we have this large group of people that have been invited by David to recover the Ark of God. I imagine it's a pretty great day. There's people singing and there's shouts and celebration. It says they were worshiping, just I imagine frantically. It just says that it was all out. There was no holding back. They were singing songs loudly. They're playing the instruments loudly. Everything was going along, and so they've made the trip down, and then they get to the house, and they're expecting them. This isn't a surprise, and so they come back, and there are 2 people that we know are added to the group. There's Ahio and Uz. One is leading the cart, and the other is walking alongside. And so it looks like they're in some kind of a caretaker role. This object has been at their house for 20 years. They probably know more about the ark and whatever they did to watch over it than anybody that's there. Even more than what the priest might have said. So we have this street party, this parade going on, and you got all these people. Some of them have to be lined up, maybe in front, maybe behind, and then maybe the officials are walking in front, and it's all been organized. It's all been organized as a way of celebrating the ark and that God is present, that God is there, and it's going to be a part of worship. This new cart is being led, and it says they get to Nacon. Right near the threshing floor, as we might say around here, right by where the old Sears used to be. Okay, I've lived here long enough. I know where the old Sears used to be. So it's hard for me to find. I went out to try to find some of these locations on the Bible maps, and you can't really find them easily because some of the names have changed or they've sort of disappeared. So no one's exactly sure what happened. Did it hit a pothole? Did the ox cart hit a pothole? It says the oxen stumbled. Did the wheel go off the edge of the road? And so it's sort of things are shifting around. Nobody has a good description here, but there was this accident that went with this problem. When's that event happened? Uz reached up to steady the ark. Now, what the witnesses said, as soon as he reached up and touched the ark, he dropped dead. Just boom, instantly. That sort of ends your parade pretty quick. When some accident happens, when anything like that happens, if you're celebrating and things are going along, suddenly nobody wants to celebrate anymore. I imagine there are kids crying. There are people that are just totally in shock. And so the witnesses are saying, well, we didn't see anything do any special. We saw everything shift a little. It's hard when we read something in Scripture that's hard to find an easy answer for. And maybe you're looking for me to say, okay, how come God would have this anger against this man that probably was acting out of pure reaction? Just like when years ago, riding along in the front seat in the passenger side, and Renee would hit the brakes hard because of the traffic, and she would smack me across the chest, okay? I know my mama did it all the time when I was a kid, but I wasn't in a car seat. So I knew where it came from, or I knew where it came from Renee, because our kids were always in car seats. But it's still that reaction of knowing you're maybe too fast and suddenly you get a bruise, or the passenger gets a bruise. That's what I view happened here. So the party had ended, and people are going home, and some are crying. They don't know what has just happened. And all we know is the celebration around this special object with huge historical connection between God and Israel struck down an individual that might have been just reacting just because it was a reaction. I don't know, it can be pretty scary. I wish I could tell you, I could give you something really comforting as an answer. My only answer I have for you of how that could happen, and there are a lot of disturbing things in Scripture that you don't get a lot of good feeling from. I can't tell you the answer, and maybe that's the only thing that should comfort you. I don't think any of us can have an answer to exactly why God does some certain things that definitely don't make sense in our time, and they may not have made sense then, because our dismay over this description, which sounds like Uz had no real problems. We don't hear he was a good guy. We don't hear he was a bad guy. All we know is that when he reached up, he was irreverent to God, and now he's gone. There are a lot of preparations made in Moses' day for moving the Ark of the Covenant. They hadn't followed those. We'll talk a little bit about those next week. What did happen is David made a lot of preparations. He did a lot of things that he thought he was doing the right thing, but it proved to be a dangerous thing. It proved to be dangerous because they hadn't been used to the presence of God being that close in the community, and God's rules had a separation area, a safety zone, so to speak. And this can be scary, that a forbidden action can happen to someone, and that sort of affects us. I wonder, do you think Uz knew the rule of no touching? He might have. It might have just been that reaction thing. Is it that he was so familiar, because for all we know, he's 20 years old. This thing may have been in his house, in his barn, in his carport, his whole life, and it had never been a problem before. But on this day, he doesn't get a second chance. He doesn't get a shock to warn him that something's going on. All we know is that he reaches when the cart tilts, and he doesn't. Okay, God probably knows it's not going to fall off, or that it'll float in the air or something. It's not going to get damaged because God can handle his own problems, but all he knows is that it's falling, and he thinks he can stop it. He could just as easily been crushed by this thing, I guess. I don't know if that insight helps you at all, that there was a lot of things we don't know about it. I don't know, the basic thought is, I do wonder if he knew the rules. It doesn't say they were of the priestly caste or clan. So maybe they've just been the caregivers, and like I said, it's been around all his life. Maybe it's the scariest one, is that he's just too familiar with the physical ark to be scared of it. And so he may have known all the rules, but he's not afraid. He's not going to. So he reacts, and now the story has him dead on a particular spot on the road, place they're going to name after him. Not that that's that great of a gift to him or his family. The object was being moved by David as a celebration. And now it's turned into a kind of tragedy. I don't know. I doubt I've helped you much. I bet you still have a little bit of concern about it. The only comfort I have for you is that we aren't alone in knowing that there's some things about God's process that we don't understand, that whole community was being reminded of. As a generation, they didn't have their traditions of understanding and being told about the holiness, Holy of Holies and the holiness of God, and that God was an angry and jealous God. They didn't have those experiences. They had 400 years of pretty much peace-free time until the army, until the Philistine army was rebuilt and they started coming back and trying to take their land. And anyway, David, it says, responds with anger. It's like, God, don't you know we're trying to celebrate? Don't you know that this is all being done in your name? That we've got this whole big plan. We've got it all worked out. We've got replacement oxen. There's nobody. Everybody's going to get fed. Everything's going to go great with this deal. I'm celebrating you. Why have you allowed this celebration to end like this? I think David and the people there figured out that day that something was wrong in what they were doing. Have you ever, any of you could have done this. In my case, I actually did hire someone for the job. It was one of these furnace things. I've been known to take a wrench and a screwdriver, like to relight the pilot light in the attic. I didn't do it this time. We bought a little maintenance contract on our heating and air unit in the first house we moved into, and it was probably our first winter here, so they come out to work on it and they leave, and the next day we try to light the furnace. You flip the little switch to heat, and instead of hearing the gas start being lit, we heard boom. Didn't blow our house off, but I tell you, I couldn't get to the turn-off switch and eventually to the gas valve fast enough. If I had done the work myself, I would be even more afraid because I would have been on top of a ladder when that happened. Sometimes we'll take on jobs not understanding all the consequences of the things that we're doing. We'll take for granted that we know enough to light a pilot light. Well, David starts out with anger, and then it hits him that the presence of God, even from the days back of all the way back to Moses, anytime you were moving and working in the presence of God, it could be dangerous. God had warned them how dangerous it could be. Don't come onto my mountain. And they put a little fence line up, and even if an animal went onto it, the animal would die. It was some pretty strict rules. And David has this great relationship with God. I doubt that he was ever really afraid of God. He sang about God, he wrote songs about God, celebrated God. He knew God's protection from when he was very, very young and tending sheep in the wilderness where large animals would be, he could take them out. And David had not had a fear of God that he suddenly appreciated. He didn't know what they were doing wrong. He had not researched it to figure out that they were, while he was doing things that he thought were honoring to God, they were not actually honoring to God. So it was maybe the reaching out by us was just a last step of anger that God had been building up. I can't say that. I don't think really God works that way. David and the people along the parade route that day knew that God was not pleased. And with all the preparations David had done, it was like he took out his tools and went on to work on the furnace himself, and then suddenly something has gone wrong. And what he started with to take God in a box home to Jerusalem ended in a shocking death that they didn't know if it might repeat. In fact, with the holiness of God, maybe everybody in that line could have died. We don't know why it was limited to one. If we know by next week, we'll have some idea that they're going to learn why that God might have been displeased with how the ark was being handled at the time. When a bump in the road gave a terrifying event, a boom in the furnace. I don't know, he probably thought, wow, that could have been me. Has the accident, when someone else has the problem, wow, that could have been me. And maybe at first we're angry that someone is hurt or problem, or maybe we're just thankful that God didn't choose us at that moment. David realizes that if he carries this symbol of God back to Jerusalem incorrectly, that there's no telling what could happen. He could be next. It could be they go through the city gates and God says, okay, David, you've gone too far. I've already given you a warning. That's all you get. The nagging question in his mind, I guess, if God can become angry and worship, doing the positive and right thing, then how in the world is he going to respond? How can I do what I had desired and get God to come in to Jerusalem? I don't know, bad stuff could happen. Things he doesn't predict because he doesn't understand all the problems they've done. So I guess the question for you to consider and to prepare yourself for next week, if you read the chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, you'll be a little more ready because it's going to change. It's going to change. We have one reference is that they're going to send the ark home with another guy. Sort of like before when it came into Israel and some people died and they just took it to the closest household and somebody had the ability to care for it or keep it safe. And, they were glad to get it back, but it was something that they decided 20 years before was dangerous, and so it was placed somewhere. So they find a house close by where someone is selected and given the honor of caring for this killer because they don't know what has happened, why it's happened. So the question for maybe you want to consider this week is, how do you feel about the presence of God in your life? Sunday morning, hopefully that's the time when you feel like you're approaching God, or at home or in your prayer time. How do you feel about that? Do you have fear? Maybe sometimes anger over things in your life? Is it sort of natural? Is it a take it or leave it attitude? I've known people like David that had a fear of not wanting to approach God anymore. You see, they had this worry about that relationship. They might have been Christians. I've known some non-Christians that just they discount it totally, but sometimes they still have a little bit of fear of God, although their language may not represent it. When you have this fear of God, typically you stay as separate as possible, thinking that you need to keep a distance to have a safer, targeting range than being anywhere close to God, because if God gets angry, you just don't know what's going to happen. So I suggest, though, that you need to think about it, that the presence of God, if you decide to try to stay away from God, you're missing something. You're going to miss a lot of things, actually. You see, the presence of God is good and powerful. I know I've taken my time to hide from God or have conversations where I stay as distant as possible because I don't feel like I'm doing right or that I don't like what's going on. But what you miss just by being in the presence of God, and it's where we'll pick up the idea next week, is that you're going to miss blessings and renewal of hope and energy and strength. You're going to miss the indescribable feeling of joy that makes you smile where you can't really describe it to anybody except that you just know you feel good about it. And sometimes that can even happen in the difficult times of your life because God comes close enough that you still understand the joy of being in His presence for whatever you're going through. As children of God, the relationship is not limited by the fear that we feel or even one little mistake that we might make. Those are not the things that we should fear, that we're going to suddenly get zapped and, pow, we're gone. As people, after Jesus has come, it's a different understanding of God than David had. Now, David experienced exactly what God was like. He was angry. You do something wrong, and if you cross that line, you were inside the safety zone. You were taking your life in your own hands. But David never would have had a guess that one day that God would have sent someone to give us a hedge of protection that takes away the danger zone. We are allowed to approach and be with God. Or maybe just notice that God has approached us. It isn't that God's mellowed. It's about the provision of Jesus Christ as the one who gives us the way. He came to satisfy the requirements of the law that David is supposed to be trying to keep. He came to change it from immediate flash of anger that gives response to a holy, perfect love that we can choose to move closer to or further away from. I hope that you think about moving closer. There's really two problems. One is that we have a lack of knowledge of God, which gives us fear. Or the other problem that I think we always have to deal with is that we take God for granted. We spent time in places and we don't even look for the holiness, don't even look for the restrictions that we might still want to have. And really that's when that's when we're irreverent, or that's when we are crossing the line. So next week we're going to talk about the rest of this chapter, and it turns around. David is going to take the ark and place it in the kingdom in Jerusalem. We're going to look at the blessings that come even before the movement is made and the ones that can come later, when we really try to be close to God. All glory be to God.